What's going on, everybody? It's Jay Myrax again. Welcome to another episode of Altruwisdom. So today, what I want to talk about is groove and quantization and maybe swing and some of the other more mystified things that are elusive to producers in music production and beat making. So I was looking at Gear Sluts a couple days ago, and someone was asking me, or asking in general, about why there's no talk about quantization and how to achieve groove and things in these music production courses that are available online. And one of the thoughts that I had was that it most likely is the case that that subject matter is out of scope for general music production, about how to learn how to use DAWs and signal processing and whatnot. So quantization is one of those areas where a lot of times the recommendation is use 100% quantize. So if you listen to some other beat makers that have more swing or more groove and bounce in their music, you'll notice that it's very difficult for you as a producer to emulate that kind of bounce or even achieve your own type of bounce when you use 100% quantize. So 100% quantize is just a recommendation if you have poor or sloppy timing that you want to fix. I personally don't subscribe to using 100% quantize in most situations because it's a bit too rigid. So for me, quantization is a great tool. I'm not opposed to quantization at all, but I think that you have to use a lot of trial and error in cases where you're looking for swing or a bit more feel and emotion for quantization to actually work. Because sometimes quantization can make things very stiff and unhuman. It can sound very rigid. And you know, quantization is a bit of a sensitive topic because some people will claim that certain drum machines and groove boxes have better groove and more human feel, and the quantized feels more human. And I will say that's a subjective thing. I don't think that any particular drum machine has more of a human feel over another drum machine. So I mean, I'm an MPC owner. I have a 2000 XL. I've used the 3000 plenty. I've used, you know, the 4000. I got the Renaissance. Also have Machine. I use Reason, use Logic, Ableton, and whatnot. So I think everything does have its own way of implementing quantize. But as far as 100% quantize goes, it's very subjective which one has the best 100% quantize. So instead, what I subscribe to more so is using some of the devices that are available to you as a producer. So one thing that I've realized is that for me as a producer, a lot of getting the groove in my music has to do with myself and my internal pulse or internal rhythm, and trying to synchronize that with the metronome that's in the DAW. And some ways that I do that or achieve that is to use external devices. And what I mean by external devices is more so things that have to do with my body, because ultimately when I'm trying to apply a groove or bounce, I try to make my body mimic how I want people to groove to my music. So a big factor for me when I'm making music is to get the head nod. So you'll see some producers have like crazy head nods. You know, some people got the, you know, they got this, they got the shake or whatever, and it's all kind of different head nods that people got, right? You know, some people got like the craziest head nods. I've seen some of my producer buddies that just have like crazy head nods, and I do too. I have a crazy head nod depending on what kind of groove I'm trying to impart. Sometimes I need that head nod to dictate or to help me to keep my internal pulse in line or in sync with the metronome, where it's not such a rigid feel. Because otherwise, if I'm just going rigid 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm just staying rigid, then I'm not getting the groove that I want. But if I, do the little twist or whatever, then it gives me a little bit more bounce. And that more bounce gives me the ability to really just get people feeling the way that I want them to feel when they hear the beat. Because when I'm bouncing like that, I'm also programming the drums like that. So that's one device I use. You don't have to have a head nod, but some people use a foot tap. And, some people just have a little rock or whatever. And those little motions give you a bit more of groove factor. But you have to make sure when you're doing that you also use, you go away from the quantize and allow your natural swing to be imparted into the sequence. And then once you listen back, you can make decisions on which parts need to be quantized and which parts do not. I don't recommend that you approach every bouncy track with the perspective of looking for a specific quantized value or specific swing value to get that perfect Jay Dilla swing or the perfect DJ Premier swing, or whatever producer you may be emulating, or whatever you're using as your benchmark for swing. I don't think that there is a perfect quantized value for that. There are groove templates out there that people have made to try to emulate different drum machines and different swings. But ultimately, as a producer, part of what makes your music unique is your own feel in the music. So oftentimes you want to try to focus on allowing the sequencer to capture your groove, and you can use the devices or the technology such as quantization to align things that don't fit your ideal swing and fix those things. So I believe that correction is great. You can drag things, you can move things manually. Personally, I come from the day of not being able to manually drag stuff using an MPC. I would allow the loop to just continuously go, tap in each drum sound and make sure everything is locked and feeling the way I want. And if something was off, I would use that erase button, punch out or remove the thing that was off, and then punch it back in so that everything is in sync and everything is feeling the way I want. So I think there's different methods to achieving that. I feel like if you're not a good finger drummer, you should be open to the idea that you can place all of your sounds in the sequencer and arrange them to feel how you want. Whether you're using audio or MIDI, you have the ability to place things in or offbeat, off grid, to make it feel exactly the way you want. So you have to try to be flexible enough to understand that it's not always about staying on the grid. Sometimes you got to push things forward against or off the grid. Sometimes you think, okay, I want something to drag a little bit, so you need to push the snares or the hi-hats a little bit forward. Or sometimes you want things to be a little bit early, so you need to slide things early off the grid. So there's different techniques of achieving that. You have to play around with it. Don't be stuck in this mindset that everything is about quantization. Everything is not about quantization. If you think about a real drummer doesn't use quantization. A real drummer has their own internal pulse, and they're allowing their own internal pulse to dictate what the groove is going to be. So quantization is just a tool for a music producer to be able to make things a bit more in sync if they're a more sloppy player. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is that with groove, or like these bounce rhythms and stuff, bounce, if you think about what bounce is, we take the analogy of, say, like a ball, for example. You bounce a ball on the ground, right? The first bounce of that ball is going to be the hardest velocity possible for that ball to fall at, because you're throwing it down the first time and it's hitting the ground, so it pops up, so you get the max velocity at that point. And any subsequent bounce after that first bounce, if you don't hit the ball again, the ball is going to continue to lose velocity. So we got to consider now that bounce, when we're talking about a rhythm, a bounce also can behave in a similar way. So you have to be careful with velocity. Sometimes producers will try to program beats using 100% velocity. So full velocity will limit the amount of bounce you can get in a pattern, because the first hit, great, 100% velocity, but you might need to have lesser velocities or ghost notes and ghost strikes in other areas that use less velocity, and that gives you that second bounce after the first hit that gives you a little bit more of the off-kilter rhythm. So you have to play with velocity and not use 100% velocity, because that's not how you achieve a proper bounce in any type of rhythm. So velocity is important. You need to make sure that your velocity is balanced and that the velocity is appropriate, because otherwise you end up having a nice rhythm, but everything is full velocity, so it's just like boo, 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 instead of it being like boom, catch, boom, boom, catch, boom, catch, boom, catch. See, the first hit, boom, that's my first 100% velocity, but then the second hits, catch. That's like lighter hits, catch, boom, catch, catch, boom. So what I found is that, okay, a 2-bar loop gives me a good foundation to play that push-pull rhythm. So if I use 2 bars, I can kind of play with using lighter and more off-kilter rhythm, get off the grid, and then once the 2 bars loops around, that first hit is always going to lock me back in. So that gives me that slump feel. So if I program a 2-bar loop instead of trying to program an 8-bar loop and structure my beat around 2 bars, then I can play with being off and on, because 2 bars gives me just enough time to drift out and then come right back in and keep the head nod going. So those are some things to play with. The whole idea of quantization and what quantization values work, you got to play with different quantizations, because different values will give you different feels. For example, some people like to use 16 triplet for making the more of a classic rigid boom bap feel when it's right. So you got that. But some people use a triplet for that, and that'll give them that right. That's a triplet. So that's a 16 triplet. So you got to play with that and see, where the quantize is going to fit your idea for what you're trying to accomplish, groove and bounce wise. But just keep in mind, it's ultimately best for you to program drums. If you're gonna produce or program from a live perspective, you want to practice what you're gonna play and rehearse it before you start laying it down. Because if you practiced it enough, then you have more of a freedom and flexibility to go behind the beat a little bit or push the beat forward a little bit. You'll have more flexibility in doing that, because you'll know exactly what the pattern is. So then at that point, it's just about what kind of pocket you want the drums to be in. So practice always makes perfect. Practice will get you most of the way there. In a lot of cases, practice is the main thing that's stopping you from getting the groove. But even if you're not a great drummer and that's not really your forte, then don't be afraid to put things on the sequencer by hand and move things around until it starts feeling right. Because ultimately, your ear and also your body, the way your body moves to the groove, that's going to tell you whether it's correct or not. So it's a feeling. This bounce and these off-kilter, shuffle, swing beats that we talk about, a lot of that is a feeling. So we got to just have a good sense for when it feels right. So move your body as you make music. You don't have to go crazy, but just make sure that you test out your rhythm somehow. You got to give yourself a head nod or something to make sure and verify that your rhythm and that groove is right. So just a couple notes about quantization and groove, because the topic comes up a lot. I've had people ask me on my Instagram, hey, how do you get the groove to sound like that? What did you do? What quantized value? So these are some of the thoughts that I have and some of the methodologies that I use. If you look back in some of my old videos, or most of my old videos, I don't really quantize much of anything. If anything, I'll quantize maybe some snares, but a lot of times when I program, I start from a 2-bar pattern and just don't quantize and try to fix things after that don't fit with the overall vision for the groove. So maybe look back, check out some of the other videos that I have. Those will give you some more practical applications of how I approach it, but I just wanted to give you my mindset and tell you about how I approach things. All right, so I hope this video is helpful for you. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I love to interact with you guys and talk more about music production. Make sure that you guys follow me on Instagram. My Instagram, I will put in the description below, but I'm at Altruist. That's pretty much any social media except for Facebook. I'm Altruist Productions, but follow me on Instagram. I'm always dropping beats and dropping a little bit of tidbits here and there about music production and whatnot. So follow me. And also, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so, because we are really getting it in this year. I promise you, we are doing some big things this year, and I want you to be involved and to just roll with me. So hit the subscribe button, share this video with your friends, and I really hope you guys have a blessed day, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace.